Hello, in this video I'm going to cover the flight numbers. So several companies now are using a 4-number system for kind of describing disk's flight. So I wanted to take a minute and talk through those 4 numbers, what they mean and how you can help use them to your advantage when you're selecting a disk or maybe just seeing what else is out there to throw. So I'm going to start with the first number. So the first number of the 4 flight numbers is speed. So a disk's speed is actually pretty directly correlated to the width of the rim and the shape of the rim. So a higher speed disk is going to tend to be a wider, sharper rim, whereas a slower speed disk, like a putter, is going to have a more narrow and blunt type rim. So speed, I believe it goes between 1 and some disks are labeled up to 14, and there may even be a speed 15 out there somewhere. So speed, like I said, is correlated to that rim size, but a lot of people are kind of operating under the misconception that a faster speed disk will fly farther for them. That's not necessarily the case. So it's limited by a player's arm speed and what they're able to actually throw cleanly and get out there with a nice a full release. So for me, I know that around a speed 10 or 11 disc is about all that I can grip. Any bigger than that and the grip itself becomes an issue. And even beyond that, my arm speed isn't quite high enough for me to actually get a faster disc up to speed. So to know what you're able to get up to speed, you can go trial and error. Start with slower drivers, maybe that are around speed 6, 7, 8, somewhere in that range. And just see how they fly for you. Are you able to get them to get some turn to the right, or are they just dive bombing hard left? That can sometimes be an indication that a disc is a little bit too fast for you. Or you can use this rule. I think I came up with it, but if somebody else out there has already used this idea and I somehow borrowed it from them, please let me know. So to do this rule, you need an estimated average distance for your longest consistent drives. So you take that distance in feet. So it might be 200 feet, 300 feet, 400 feet, somewhere in there. And then you divide that by 30. So your average max distance on a typical day divided by 30. And that gives what I'm going to call your highest speed disk that you're going to be able to get up to speed on a typical day. And I typically round down and use discs slower than that. So for me, on my best days, I can get close to 400 feet, but more realistically, my average max distance is around 350 to 360 feet. So 360 divided by 30 gives me about 12. And from my experience, about speed 11 or 12 is about the max speed of a disc that I can throw and still get the flight characteristics out of it that are described on the disc. And also I can throw discs slower than that up to speed as well. So that doesn't mean you only throw that high speed of a disc. That's just going to be your targeted max distance disc. So if, let's say, you throw 240 feet, so 240 feet divided by 30 gives you about 8. So about speed 7 or 8 is probably about the fastest disc that you should be throwing for max distance. Just a helpful rule of thumb. So we spent a lot of time talking about speed. That's that first number. The second number, we're not going to talk about quite as much, is glide. So that goes on a scale from 0 to maybe about 6, and I could be wrong on that. But glide is just a measure of how the disc stays in the air. And in my opinion, it's not worth spending a lot of time on. It's kind of a matter of opinion, and only the extremes really make much of a difference. So a really low glide disc will have a tendency to get to the ground faster, and a really high glide disc will tend to float a little bit more. But there's not really much of a science to how that's measured or graded. Okay, so moving on to the third number, it's turn. And this one's a little tricky just in the way they choose to do the numbers. So turn is sometimes measured as a negative number, but I'm just going to speak in absolute values. So turn, there can be some discs that show absolutely no turn at all, and those are sometimes listed as 0 turn or a positive turn instead of a negative turn. And then it goes all the way up to a turn of about, I think, 4 or possibly 5 turn. So a disc that has a ton of turn when it comes out of your hand, as a right-handed backhand thrower, it's going to flip way over to the right. So a disc with high turn is going to have a larger tendency to do that, and a disc with a very low turn will not flip up at all. So it'll hold that release angle. So then going to that last number, fade. So fade is what a lot of players will see in their initial throws as they're learning. So that tendency of a disc as it's slowing down to cut over to the left as a right-hand backhand thrower is fade. Some players make the mistake of avoiding discs that fade at all. They're looking for just discs that give them the complete max distance, no matter the case. But actually, having a disc with fade in your bag is very useful for fighting the wind. For any time you need to get around a corner, it's sometimes, a lot of players would agree, it's often easier to throw forehand shots with a disc that has some fade as well. So I encourage players to have some discs that have very little fade, but also some discs that have maybe a fade of about 3 or even 4 in their bag to be able to shape those shots. And if I didn't mention it already, fade is measured 0 to, I think, 4 or maybe even 5 in some places. So to review those flight numbers, the first number is speed. Faster does not mean better. So the speed can be measured anywhere from 0 to 15, and in my opinion, most players would be well served by throwing speed 10 or less. Glide, that's the one I spent the least time on. Glide is a higher number, means it might stay in the air a little bit longer. Your mileage may vary. Then the third number, turn, that's going to be the disc flipping up out of your hand and drifting off to the right if you're a right-hand backhand player. That's helpful as a newer player to have a disc that does have some turn. And that last number is fade. So that's how the disc finishes at the end of a flight. A disc with 0 fade will kind of hold that turn the whole way, or hold whatever line it's on and float pretty straight. So I hope that's helpful. As always, if you have questions or comments, hopefully you leave them down below. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you in the next one.